And we are live. Welcome to everyone in our audience today. On behalf of Una Collective, we are thrilled to have you with us for our December webinar. And before we kick off, we're going to start with some polls. Firstly, everyone has had a chance to write in what sector they are from. And we also have another poll. Where are you located today? Where are you calling in from? So hopefully the poll box has popped up. Please fill it in and we can take a look. Okay, mixed bag. I can't seem to see my poll box anymore, but that's all right. I'm hoping there's lots of people from everywhere. Oh, great, there's 65% from Amsterdam. Oh, we have 30% from outside the Netherlands. That's probably my family and friends in Australia. We have people in impact and a whole bunch of people from finance, which is really nice. So thanks for filling that out. It's always good to know where you're coming from. So I'm Phoebe, co-founder and CEO of Una Collective, based here in Amsterdam. For those of you not yet familiar with us, Una serves as a platform that fosters collaboration among women in business and culture. It's a meeting point enabling disruptive dialogue among leaders and change makers that grows women's social capital. We have a membership launching beginning of 2021, so please keep an eye out for this. And in the meantime, keep coming along to our digital events until, of course, we get to see you face to face again. So today I'll be hosting our guest speakers at our roundtable chat. The subject of today's webinar is, of course, women don't need fixing, men don't need blaming, why business needs press refresh on gender equality. So the reason we got here is because research has begun to show us more and more that when it comes to the culture of inclusivity in business, not all that glitters is gold. So in other terms, figures indicate that a number of initiatives and approaches to reach gender balance in companies are actually counterproductive and harmful. And at Una Collective, we deeply believe in the culture of inclusivity. Inclusivity for us means celebrating individual differences and valuing them in an ongoing effort and collective development. And this is the reason why we found it important before launching our membership and presenting our own strategy to approach gender inequality to reflect on this. So how? By unpacking the concept of inclusivity, questioning the old structures in place, and inviting informed experts to support us in this process of gender balance. So I'm very excited to now welcome our very special guests. We have Gill Whitty-Collins. Hi, Gill.
Hello everybody. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Thanks for joining. And we also have Jens van Tricht. I hope I've pronounced that properly, Jens.
You're doing very well, thanks. And thanks
Fabulous
for having me here. I look forward to an inspiring evening.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. So I think we just dive on in. So first of all, we want to talk about the concept of inclusion and how it's not enough. So I wanted to get started with a quote by a Harvard Business Review author called Aviva Wittenberg-Cox. And she says, so let's stop saying that women lack confidence, need to lean in, or aren't as ambitious as men. Enough already. Even if this is sometimes true, it's not the problem. It's a symptom. Instead, let's focus on the fundamentals and start by asking this. What's wrong with organizations that can't attract, retain, and develop female talents? Because you want to know what doesn't work? Trying to fix women. So, Gill, do you want to kick us off? What's your thoughts on this?
You know, I mean, there's so many answers, but I think where you start really is what's fundamentally wrong with those organizations is the culture. You know, culture, it's invisible, but it is so powerful. And the thing about being in a culture is, you know, if a person feels like they belong in a culture, they're comfortable in a culture, they can relax and they can perform at their best. or not. The opposite is obviously true. And so, you know, if you have a male dominant culture, which sadly so many organizations still do, particularly at the senior levels, guess who's relaxed and comfortable and performs in that culture, and guess who doesn't. Obviously much more difficult for women to perform in that. And then you add in this whole mix that, you know, it's just human to try to fit into a culture. If we don't naturally fit, most of us will try to fit in, which means we're not being ourselves, we're not leveraging our strengths, we're not being authentic. And people can smell that inauthenticity, and they know there's just something that they don't quite like. And so, you know, we don't see the culture unless we're extremely conscious and aware of this issue. We don't see the culture. We just see people who are performing and authentic and that we like and that we think are great, and people who aren't. When in reality, what we're actually seeing is people who are comfortable in the culture and people who aren't, and are possibly absolutely brilliant, but just not able to perform there and to rise to the top.
Yeah.
But I think for me, that's the first fundamental problem with these organizations.
And Jens, do you come across this in your work, this lack of authenticity?
Wow, that's a completely different question now.
No, sorry.
Well, I think let's start with this. With that, yes, I do think there is a lot of inauthenticity in this world, and I think the way we learn to look at ourselves and each other and the world through a gendered lens, creating that from the start. We are having what are they called? Gender reveal parties now, even before birth. And that's where the inauthenticity starts, or the dehumanization, if you wish, because we learn that we are not supposed to be fully human and exploring our human potential, but we should ignore and suppress about half of it, and then develop and use and exaggerate the other half in order to be real men or real women. So yes, a lot of inauthenticity. But what I would like to add to Jill's answer on the first question is that I think a fundamental problem is actually in the society and the cultural society that creates such organizations, that is male or masculinity dominated, that is a patriarchal society. And I would even like to pose the problem that the fact that we have organizations focusing on economy and production rather than on ecology and reproduction, which are actually the core of our human existence, the very foundation. It means that we are led by patriarchal values, and they are really problematic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And well, Jill, in reference to your book, Why Men Win at Work, what you call the invisible power of culture, that's, you know, what we're talking about with Jens here, is that this pressure comes so early on in a person's life to follow this patriarchal style. You know, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I call it the invisible power of culture, and you know that these dominant cultures can take many forms. And obviously, what we're focused on here and what Jens is talking about is when there is a male dominant culture. And I think that's the fascinating thing about it. Actually, is it's, you know, people talk about patriarchy, and there's a lot of to quote the title of this webinar, blaming men for it. But actually, so much of it is unconsciously done. I honestly don't believe that most men wake up in the morning and think, how can I build the patriarchy today, and how can I leverage the male dominant culture I'm part of in order to destroy women's careers. Most men aren't doing that. Most men are actually very, very well intended and would consider themselves non-sexist, and that this world is great for everyone. You know, it's the goldfish in the bowl, isn't it? You ask the goldfish, how's the water? And the goldfish says, what water? And it assumes the water's fine for everyone. So I think that's the most fascinating thing about it, and I think Jens is alluding to it, is this is not evil at work. This is not Darth Vader. This is people who you know, are brought up a certain way and have certain inputs, and they're just being themselves, and the culture's working very well for them, so they're reinforcing it without even realizing that they're doing that, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jens, I mean, what are your thoughts on this idea that men are being blamed? They probably don't. They probably don't feel like.
Well, my first response is that I regret that it is very often. I feel it is also being misused by men as a way not to have to take feminist challenges seriously, or to apply them to themselves. It's very similar to the way white people react to discussions about racism. But actually what happens from these social justice movements is a request, a demand for equality,
absolutely,
actually for living up to the pretensions and the ambitions that we all say we're living towards, or that we're trying to put into practice. So I do agree that blaming men as a strategy doesn't work, but I do think it's very important to hold men accountable and to ask them to become part of the solution, and not to lean back too easily or too quickly when they think they've done their share, because we have a collective share to do, and it's huge. And so instead of blame, I would like to stretch the word responsibility.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. I mean, Gill, you and I have talked about this recently. And it's a big focus for us at UNA, that the idea is that women make up 50% of the world's population. They make up 60% of global spending. And even in the Netherlands, we have 60% of university graduates are women. Yet in the workplace, due to their lack of representation, women become a minority group. So it not only strengthens the idea that they're not supposed to be there, but in practice, it also means that gender inequality issues sit in these diversity and inclusion departments rather than with the CEO. So I really want to bring our chat to the business journey. And so I want to start with the idea of recruitment, because recruitment really is the starting point of where we start going wrong. And research shows that sometimes the intentions behind recruitment are not completely effective for women. So as you mentioned, Jens, like really recently, you know, movements such as Black Lives Matter and Me Too, companies have felt the pressure to show to the public their numbers with regards to gender and diversity. And they've started to really attempt to extend internal KPIs, like let's get more women in by so-and-so. But the problem follows that these are superficial and do not really implicate a deep and multifaceted action, and it doesn't send the right message. I mean, Gill, what are your experiences with recruitment, and where do you think businesses could be doing a bit better? Oh, Gill, we've lost Gill. So Jens, maybe you can bring your thoughts to recruitment. I mean, what's your experience with the work that you do with men?
Yeah. Well, what I know, I mean, I've been part of several inclusion, recruitment, whatever trajectories in several organizations and businesses. It's not my core. We work as an NGO very much in NGO spheres, but more and more businesses and larger organizations have been taking this on. And what I think is the main lesson from everything I learned there is that indeed the culture needs to change. So it is relatively easy to get people in, but to keep them is very difficult.
And do you, in your experience, Jens, do you find your discussions, or the discussion should sit more with leadership teams rather than with like HR departments?
I think it's very important that leadership teams take the responsibility and live the change and represent the change. So they need to do the work themselves as well, both
that's a good point.
Individually and also in their teams, and to make this trickle down, and also of course in their policies.
Absolutely. Well, we got Gill back.
Yeah.
Gill, can you hear us?
Oh no.
She's jumping in and out. Okay, well, we'll keep going. So I guess this is an easy jump to the next idea, Jens, which we've talked about, which is trainings. And so you know, with in terms of consulting, in terms of NGOs in this field, you know, trainings by themselves is not working for these organizations.
Trainings never work, just like policy papers in themselves don't work, or publicity campaigns in themselves don't work. If we want sustainable change in a society, then we need to work on many different levels. We need to work on individual change, and we need to work on relational change and team or organizational change and community change, and we need to have policy change, and we need to do it at all these levels. And indeed, it's not going to be a quick fix.
And at the Emancipator, what do you guys focus on there?
We've been focusing very much the past few years on engaging boys and men in violence prevention. And I think that's also an important discussion here, because we know that violence also in the workplace plays a huge role. Me Too has been showing this, but there is a proliferation of reports even by the International Labor Organization and from academia. And so also on all levels in the labor market, we know that male dominance and harassment and violence and abuse play an important role in creating and sustaining certain cultures.
Absolutely. I mean, of course, we're seeing that even with the pandemic, that the numbers for even domestic abuse are skyrocketing. I mean, of course, it makes sense that it translates into the workplace, and if taken care of, completely revolutionizes a workplace's culture.
Well, and I would even add, I don't think it's just been taken into the workplace. I think the workplace, with its hierarchies and its interests and its power relations, I mean, violence is at the same time the main expression of inequality, but it's also the main tool of inequality. But before risking to end with the violent stuff here, the other part that's very important for us is to promote caring masculinities. We've been lobbying for extended paternity leave for fathers.
Absolutely.
We're trying to engage men into caring professions, like education, like healthcare, etc. Because actually the transformation of the gendered ideas of masculinity takes very much place along this axis of violence versus care. And I think this is actually on the individual level and also on the global level, the way we treat the world, or we still prefer to see dominance over softness.
So
I'll leave it there.
Well, I'm hoping we've got Gill back. Gill, can you hear me? Oh, she's jumping in and out.
No, do you know, I'm going to turn, does it help if I turn my video off?
Yes.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
So Gill, we were just...
I'm sure you were sick of my face anyway. I've been listening very, very interestedly. So, and I mean, just to really reinforce Jens's point, I'm such a huge believer in gender neutralizing parental policies and care policies in general, but parental policies. I think it's one of the biggest things that we could do is genuinely, you know, why not equalize parental leave when a child is born, apart from the, you know, the couple of weeks maybe required for the biology. The rest, why on earth would we not equalize that? And then a man is just as likely to take parental leave as a woman. That would fix so many of the issues, and you know, and is proven to completely change the way that parents take care of the kids for the rest of, and the family for the rest of their lives. When a father's been at home with a baby, he looks. And I think it's equalizing the policies, but also truly accepting that. So truly a company, it's not just on paper, but it's also, we really do expect this from the men as much as the women. And we absolutely find it valid, because I know a lot of men who, even where their company has good parental policy, they still don't take it because they're concerned it's going to affect their careers. So hugely endorse that.
It has huge long-term implications too. I mean, and when I say implications, I mean benefits. I know myself, with the knowledge that I can approach, you know, the years where I'm going to start creating family, knowing that my career and my partner's career has a safe space to continue to thrive. I mean, it takes the pressure off, doesn't it? And it gives you long-term stamina to not think, oh, that huge chunk of area of my life that I've worked my butt off to, you know, study for, to get, you know, up in businesses and higher levels, that kind of achievement doesn't just vanish when I you know, am, you know, approaching my 40s and I have tiny kids running around.
Absolutely. And, you know, I know so many men through this year where, you know, Phoebe, I've written a lot about the impact of this pandemic on women, and women taking such a huge burden of the unpaid work at home, including obviously the kids, which has always been true, by the way, but it's become even more true this year. And I've had so many men writing to me saying, you know, Gill, and I'm not saying this is all men, but I've had so many writings saying, Gill, you know what, I would absolutely love to do my 50-50 share at home, but it is absolutely not supported by my employer. And while my employer is very proactive about supporting the women, and actually, you know, literally saying, oh, I know you can't hit that deadline because you've got homeschooling, I'm, as a man, getting absolutely none of that understanding. So employers are actually making this worse and reinforcing the gender gap here, even when the men are actually trying to set it straight.
Yeah, and I guess that's a perfect transition into what we really wanted to focus on this afternoon and this evening in the last kind of 15 minutes. You know, I wanted to kind of set up our solution discussion around a really practical situation that lots of people go through in the workplace, which is, you know, the idea of like, let's pretend we are consultants or a group of people within the company coming to the leadership team, and the CEO sits us down and says to us, where do we begin? What's a solid long-term solution? I mean, as the three of us, where do we start? We start with recruitment, we move to trainings, we talk about policies. Jens, where would you start if you had it?
CEO, of course.
Yeah.
It starts with the CEO. I mean, what does I assume, what does the CEO do in his own life? What is his gender pattern? What is what is his entitlement and his privilege and his responsibility? But also, what is the price he's paying for that? We know it's an often quoted research outcome, and I don't know what is the source, but it sounds very likely that when people are asked on their deathbed what they regret most, it's not that they didn't work harder, but that they didn't spend more time with their families.
Yeah.
And we see a lot of men when they become grandparents, or when later in life, perhaps in their midlife or whatever, they get a new partner and maybe they have kids again. They make different choices. Or men who get in crisis, they start to see that they pay the price also for their traditional masculine role. with all its benefits, let's not forget those, because that makes it difficult to do it differently. But I think I would like to ask the CEO what he does, and I don't think it's an easy answer. I don't think I would take an easy answer for granted, because it would not make much sense, and I don't think it would work on the long term if the CEO stays out of it and we start working with the teams.
Yeah, and
Jill,
simultaneously.
Yeah.
Where would you start?
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally with Jens on this one. I would absolutely start with the CEO and with the lead team. And I wouldn't go anywhere until I'd really understood that. And really understanding what are their motivations? Where are they on this? Do they get it? Do they truly get it? Do they truly get that gender equality and diversity is good for business? It is not something that they need to do because everyone's watching, for PR reasons, because the board have told them. Do they truly get it, and do they truly want it because they believe that it's going to benefit their business and make their business stronger?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Until they get that, until we really believe they've got that, I wouldn't go any further, because it isn't going to stick. And I would want to see them really getting that deep down in their soul and absolutely committing to the 50-50 target before any action was taken, and before even we did any understanding of what we needed to do. Looking them in the whites of the eyes and saying, yeah, I absolutely get why 50-50 is right, and that's absolutely what we want. Now, dear consultant team, please tell us how we do that.
Jens, you look like you're bursting.
Until we got there.
Well, Jens is about to scream his response. Go, Jens.
I'm very happy. I'm looking forward. Please get us a CEO and get Joey there. I'd love to continue with this in practice.
Yeah.
No, I want.
So I think we need to focus on, like, okay, so we've got the whole team involved. The leadership team are all genuinely with us. What now? What do we do now, Jens? What do we tell this CEO?
I'm sorry, but this is part of the problem, because we want it to be too easy. And I'm going to say it's more complex, because the 50-50 doesn't just mean that there is 50% women in the lead team or wherever in the organization. It's also that the culture will be challenged. The normalities will be challenged. Even maybe the priorities in the organization will be challenged. I had an example a few years ago that really opened my eyes in the diversity and inclusion dynamics. It was a social media post from a woman of color. She was hired into a university team, and they were so happy to get someone from color because it matched with her diversity ambitions, etc. Until she opened her mouth. And then she spoke things about the curriculum and about the things, the day-to-day things as they went. And then it became clear they didn't want diversity. They wanted a woman of color who did just like everyone else.
They wanted to tick the box.
Yeah. So, there's a quote from one of my teachers in gender studies, Pamela Patinama, that I really liked. I think it's very important. It also actually, well, I'll say that later. She said, we don't want to have a different division of roles in the same bad play. We want to rewrite the script. And as still an anarchist, not so much on the old fashioned barricades, but now here on these. But we used to say, we don't want the bakery. We don't want another piece of cake. We want the whole bakery.
Yeah.
And so if we want to change things fundamentally, we need to go to the fundamentals. And it's not going to be easy with the CEO and the lead team to get them to accept this. It's not going to be one afternoon. And the question is, if we get that done and we go elsewhere, I can't answer where we go then, because it would depend on the new dynamics and the new representation of people and the new agenda that would be present then.
Yeah. Jill, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I totally agree. It's absolutely, there has to be not just, the woman just doesn't have to be in the room. She has to be in a culture that she can truly perform and be valued, which is why I always start with the lead team really need to get that the business will benefit from that. But I mean, once you've got them there, then for me, you've got to go into diagnosis. And you've got to really understand what is causing the issue. I assume this company that's hypothetically come to us, they have a gap, they have an issue, they know that they're not doing this well. I would do what I do a gender gap audit, where you're really looking at the data, but you're also looking qualitatively, where is the issue? Is it at the recruiting level? Is it at entry level? It often isn't, by the way. Many companies do a pretty good job at entry level. What level do the women start to drift away? So that those 50% of the population, Phoebe, that we talk about, those equally intelligent, equally competent, equally talented, equally capable leaders, what level do they start to ebb away? What's the promotion process like? Is the issue that the women aren't getting put forward for promotion, or is it that they're not getting selected? Why are they not getting selected? What's the salary gap like? Pretty much everywhere you look, it's 17%. It's probably going to be that. How do you fix that? As we talked, do you truly have a gender neutral parental policy, and do you truly embrace all genders leveraging that?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
the qual, getting into the qual, asking the women, do you feel you belong here? Do you feel you can perform at your best here? If the answer is no, which it probably is, what causes that for you? Then you have your diagnosis. It's like a medical examination, right? Then you know where the problem is, you know what's causing it, and then you can get into a tailored plan for that specific organization. And I think really importantly, a few interventions, manual interventions that are sustained and sustainable. You actually intervene in the processes and the systems. And I would always give a lead team owner responsibility for each of those interventions, so they are accountable for making sure that they actually happen within the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Ian?
Well, and I would like to add the question, what women are being recruited and promoted? Because we're talking about diversity and inclusion, and it should be very clear from the beginning that this is an intersectional issue, and that if we don't take that into this whole process, we end up in a similar situation, maybe having an all-white lead team.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And then do it all over again. So again, when revising the culture and the dynamics and the processes and the structures, we have to look at this from an intersectional point of view, and also design intersectional strategies.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, I think the key message is really it's multifaceted, and it has to start with the top. But I would love to hear, just as we finish up, what would you say to the individual members of the audience that are listening tonight? If they're in their workplace, what, as men and women, what would you both say to them if they want to, take a step towards change in their workplaces? Gill, do you want to start us off?
I mean, it so obviously depends on the person and what situation they are in. I can tell you that if, for example, you are a woman who is in a culture that you really don't feel you can be yourself in, that you really don't believe that you can use your strengths and that they're valued. My personal advice is, do not waste too much time and energy trying to change that culture if you're not at a senior level in that culture, because it is very difficult, I would say potentially impossible, to change a culture that you are not part of and you are not winning in. So I wouldn't waste too much time on that. I would personally put my energy into saying, do you know what? The important thing is I know my strengths. I know what I'm good at. I'm going to go and get myself into a culture that values and leverages those. If you are a man in a culture and you have the awareness to see that it's potentially a male dominant culture and it absolutely is not leveraging the incredible power of diversity in all its forms, and that you are, frankly under delivering as a business because of that. And I can promise you unequivocally, you are, if you have a dominant culture of a non-diverse culture of any kind, your business will be under delivering versus its potential. If you're a man, please use the incredible power that you have as a man. I cannot tell you how powerful it is when a man speaks up and says, yes, I'm a feminist, yes, I believe in equality and diversity, yes, I believe in the power of that, and absolutely, you know, backing anybody who is trying to intervene. It is so powerful. So
Yeah.
and
point.
you know what, just do something, say something, do something, because when we all stay quiet and positive, patient and polite, as I call it, we get absolutely nowhere, and we are getting nowhere.
Yeah. And Jens, what would you recommend?
Yeah. Well, I liked, of course, I want to respond to Jill a bit, sorry, because I liked her call for men speaking out as feminists. But there is two things that come up then. First, it's not safe for men to do so. So even though they have incredible power and privilege, in many men's realities, this is not what they experience. Many men feel powerless in a world where other men have more power and they are dependent on them for survival or career options. So
that's a good point.
I would say, don't try to be a some hero, but maybe connect with others and try to generate and build movement, and not necessarily just with men or women, but speaking out in favor of women is of course a great thing, and of women's rights and etc. So that was the warning. And the other thing is, speaking out as a feminist is one, but please also then live as a feminist. I'd rather have men who live a feminist life than that they call themselves feminist and not doing so. Generally, my advice would be, and I agree with Jill, it depends very much on the person, but along two lines, empower and educate yourself. And it really depends where you are, what your intersectional position towards others is. But I think educating yourself for men often entails listening. Listen to the stories of women that are all abound. We were surprised by Me Too, but I was surprised that we were surprised by Me Too, because those who had been listening knew all along that these stories were going on. And the same thing is there about racism or homophobia or whatever. So if you want to be an ally, if you want to be an advocate for inclusion, listen to the stories that are there. Create safe environments for them to be spoken. Take them seriously. And the other line is empowering, could be connecting with others, sharing stories, moving the hell out of there to another place that's better for you, developing personal leadership skills, whatever. I think both are important. And my main advice is don't start and don't stop, because really, I've been saying this a few times, but I noticed that people want a quick fix. They want a button to push on so that we can go back to normal. But the whole thing about this is that we don't want normal to go on. So
and we can't really do, it's unrealistic for us to keep going with the idea that it's going to be, I think the UN said 257 years till gender equality. We've got to keep going, one action at a time.
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump into some questions, because we've got a couple of questions from our audience for the last 5 minutes. Actually, we will start with Olia. So her question to both of you is it about recruitment or about retention? Jill, do you want to jump in there?
Because I know I was starting to talk about recruitment, wasn't I? And then I disappeared. It's absolutely both. I mean, recruitment, it is the foundation. It is extremely difficult to get to 50-50 at the top if you don't start at least with 50-50 at the bottom. And actually a lot of companies do a decent job of quite equal representation at the recruitment levels. The issue obviously is that isn't enough, as you're alluding to, and you have to have a culture where everybody can belong, and therefore they can be comfortable, and therefore they can perform. And your system, everywhere surrounding each person, that culture, that system has to be smart enough that it truly values and rewards based on ability, based on contribution, based on potential, and that it can see beyond the veneer things like confidence, like networking, and people who are smarter at that. The system has to be smart enough to see beyond those things, because otherwise, absolutely, just, you know, you can recruit completely equally, and by first, second, third level, the women will start to slip away, despite the fact that we know that when they came in, they had absolutely equal ability and potential.
Yeah. And Jens, you think that the beginning you mentioned is not too bad, but the retention is a problem with businesses.
And I think with both, it is, the question is, why do you want it? So it's a value question. And I prefer to answer questions indirectly, I find. I don't think it's about recruitment or about retention. It is about why. And if it's only because you think this is good for profit, I don't even think that's going to work. I think somewhere deep inside, there needs to be the genuine feeling that we need to treat each other equally and that we should be decent humans. And so that's what it's about. And then I agree with Jill, it's about both in all its complexities.
Yeah, I think that this, Jill, maybe you mentioned it before, but I mean, I think at the end of the day, men and women aren't out to hurt each other. And Jens, I mean, the idea that it is value centric, it is human centric at the end of the day. But we have to also pay attention to the fact that we're not going to be able to change some CEOs' deep values. So let's look at, you know, some strategy. So I think it's perfect to go into the next question. What is good strategy to devise a smart inclusivity strategy? Jill, maybe you want to get us going on that one?
I mean, you know, the absolute first thing to do before devising any strategy is to understand the issue and understand what is driving the lack of inclusion. So, you know, you would always start there, and then you can get very specific on what your strategy should be. But generally, the advice for me would be, take a look around you. Do you see a dominant culture? Do you see a dominant culture of any kind, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's skin color, whether it's religion? Do you see a dominant culture? Because if you do, then you can very, very simply make the assumption that there is not inclusion. This is not, you do not have inclusion. And honestly, the fastest way to inclusion is, and it's not the only solution, I'm not saying it is, but the fastest way is to eradicate any dominance in the culture, because you will never, it is not possible to make people genuinely included. And by the way, beyond included and belonging, which is different, it is further, and belonging is what unleashes performance. It is not possible to have inclusion in a dominant culture. So you have to start there. And if you have one, if you go into a meeting, if you go into your lead team meeting, you go into any of your meetings, have a look around you. What do you see? Do you see a culture that looks like it's inclusive? Because if you don't, it isn't. And you just got to make interventions. You've got to make them quickly. You've got to change people around. You've got to bring people in. You've got to make that intervention to get that culture included. Because to Jens' point earlier, if you just bring in, you know, a couple of people who aren't part of the dominant culture, they will flounder. Even if they're absolutely brilliant, they will flounder in that culture. And then you'll have people saying, well, we brought such and such in and they were a disaster. And you have to ask yourself, well, why were they a disaster?
Yeah,
so,
and I just want to add to that, Joe, I think that's very much connected to a lot of the problems, which is, you know, we must have 30% of women on boards. Well, that's all well and good, but what about getting the women in the middle? I mean, good luck to people looking around when they're at the top and there are no women there because of this lack of feeling of belonging. Jens, do you have
Phoebe, you and I have taught this. Don't even start me off on the 30% target, because it makes me absolutely livid. I mean, are we 30% of women, 30% of the world's population? Do we have 30% of the intelligence? To me, that is worse than no target at all. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, the German quotas last week, as you know, I was livid about that again. God help the one woman on every board. Because I tell you, she's going to have to be made of absolute iron if she wants to perform and achieve anything.
Yeah, exactly. Jens, do you have a final comment on the numbers? Because it is a thing here in the Netherlands, so I think it's relevant to you and I especially.
Yeah, I mean, it's like with violence. Also, these numbers are well known. They are tragic. They have been there for so long, and progress is so slow. So for me, it really proves we do need commitment and not just lip service and not just window dressing. So I'm still trying to answer the question about a good strategy.
Oh yes.
Well, I think this was about that. I think then we'll create a smart and intersectional inclusivity team with a strong mandate and a long-term agenda.
With the CEO sitting with them.
Well, I would assume that the team would be able to make the CEO sit with them.
Yeah, perfect.
And the word that comes up is really, I think in all this, what we actually need is good mirrors, and we need people to translate what we're seeing, because we often, and this comes back maybe to the blaming and the shaming or the nervousness that people, and especially people in power or privilege, people get around these things. And yes, we may lose our illegitimate, powerful, privileged, entitled positions, but we can learn a lot about who we are. We can have immense human growth and connection with others. One of the first things, and I don't like to generalize about men and women, because I do believe that most of the differences we find in reality are nurtured differences. Let's start another discussion here. But one of the first books that I read about gender differences was You Just Don't Understand Me. Now I forget her name. She's an American linguist, about the different ways men and women learn to communicate. And what I learned from her is that men learn to view all communication in a hierarchy, and women learn to view communication and relations in connection on a horizontal versus a vertical axis. And I think for men, it can be very liberating to step out of the vertical axis and to join the horizontal axis. And it's not easy again, but it's very worthwhile.
Absolutely.
But it allows men to become more human, like women have struggled fiercely to be allowed to develop more their human potential, both inside and in the world at large. And that's not finished at all. And we need men to be part of that solution. And I do believe there is a world to win for men. So this is what my book is about, why feminism is good for men. Sorry, it's still not out in English. If anyone knows.
We're waiting, Jens.
Yeah, well, I have the translation ready, but I don't have a publisher. Perfect. And I hesitate for self-publishing. But I do believe feminism is good for men, not because they will profit in the traditional ways, but because their scope will be so much bigger and more dimensional than they could have ever imagined.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you both so much. That's a wrap on our webinar. I appreciate you both so much taking the time for Una, but also for our audience. And I hope that, a few people walk away with some new insights, listening to a bit of disruptive dialogue. We're so grateful to you both, Jens and Gill, for your time. Thank you so much. And thank you to our awesome audience for committing to making time for yourself to listen and hopefully learn, and so you feel somewhat empowered to act. Please be sure to keep following Una Collective on LinkedIn and Instagram, and follow us closely for our next event and our very exciting membership launch, which is coming up, which includes mentoring. So mentoring is, of course, a great way to learn from each other. This idea that Jens mentioned, that we all feel connected and that we can all grow. And don't forget to take a look at our wonderful guests. They're both incredible authors. Please go and check out their books. Really wonderful. Why Men Win at Work.
Yeah,
Go, Jens,
it
go.
up. I want to read Why Feminism is Good for Men as well, because that's very in line with my...
Oh, you're better
Yes,
at that. I don't have it around.
Oh, yes. If I had it, I'd be flashing it up for you.
Oh.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And
Thank
we
you.
hope to talk, and we hope to see you guys soon. So thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Jens. Oh, there he is.
I watched the German version, but I don't know where the Dutch one is. Thank you.
Perfect. Bye, guys. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.